In May of 1944, Life magazine published a photograph that stopped the country cold. A young woman from Phoenix, Arizona, sat at a desk writing a letter. She was attractive, well-dressed, smiling, and sitting right in front of her, propped up like a paperweight, was a human skull, a Japanese soldier's skull. Her boyfriend, a Navy officer stationed in the Pacific, had mailed it to her as a gift. She had written him a thank you note. The photo's caption called it a gift from her sweetheart. Readers across America opened their magazines that week and stared at that image, and most of them were not horrified. They were curious. Some even thought it was funny. That reaction, the casual acceptance of a dead man's skull as a romantic gesture, tells you something unsettling about what the war had done to an entire generation. But the story behind that photograph goes much deeper than one shocking image. Because that skull was not some isolated act of battlefield weirdness. It was the tip of something massive, an obsession that consumed millions of soldiers across 2 oceans and 5 years of fighting. Collecting enemy souvenirs became one of the most widespread, most psychologically complex, and least talked about phenomena of the entire Second World War. And the reasons why are stranger than you might expect. If you had asked a new recruit shipping out from Camp Pendleton or Fort Benning in 1942 what he wanted to bring home from the war, he probably would have told you the same thing every soldier says. I just want to come back alive. Nobody was thinking about souvenirs before their first taste of combat. That changed fast. The first wave of American troops to see serious action arrived in North Africa in late 1942, pushing into Tunisia against Rommel's Afrika Korps. After their first real engagements, something interesting happened. Soldiers started picking things up off the battlefield. German helmets, belt buckles stamped with the eagle and swastika, Italian medals, canteens, bayonets, maps with handwriting in German that nobody could read. It started almost casually. A guy sees a German helmet lying in the sand after a skirmish outside Kasserine Pass and thinks, that would look good on my shelf. He picks it up, straps it to his pack, and keeps moving. His buddy sees him carrying it and decides he wants one too. Within weeks, entire platoons were scouring the aftermath of firefights for anything worth grabbing. Quartermaster units reported finding German equipment stashed in supply trucks alongside rations and ammunition, hidden there by infantry guys who did not want to carry the weight but also could not bear to leave it behind. The same thing happened in the Pacific almost simultaneously. Marines landing on Guadalcanal in August of 1942 found themselves in a brutal, months-long jungle campaign against entrenched Japanese forces. After each engagement, survivors picked through the wreckage. Japanese rifles, helmets with the Gold Star emblem, canteens covered in canvas, flags, anything that proved they had been in the fight and lived through it. Officers noticed the behavior almost immediately, and most of them had no idea what to do about it. Some tried to discourage it. Others were doing the same thing themselves. This decision to look the other way, to treat souvenir hunting as harmless battlefield scavenging, seemed small at the time. It was not. Because what happened next was an escalation that nobody really planned, but nobody could stop. Within the first year of serious combat, souvenir collecting went from a spontaneous impulse to an organized activity. Soldiers began competing with each other. Certain items became more valuable than others, and an unofficial hierarchy of trophies developed almost on its own. At the bottom were the easy finds, things like buttons, patches, and spent shell casings. Anyone could grab those. In the middle sat helmets, bayonets, and enemy canteens, items that required you to have actually been near the fighting. And at the top, the items that gave a soldier real status among his peers, sat the weapons. In Europe, that meant one thing above everything else: the Luger. The German Luger P08 pistol became the single most obsessed over, most hunted, most bartered, most stolen, and most lied about souvenir of the entire European war. Every American GI who set foot in France, Belgium, Holland, or Germany wanted a Luger. The pistol had a reputation that went far beyond its actual battlefield usefulness. It was sleek. It looked menacing. It was distinctly, unmistakably German. and it meant you had taken it from someone, face to face, in combat. Whether that was actually true or not, owning a Luger told everyone around you a very specific story. The demand for Lugers got so intense that an entire underground economy formed behind the front lines. Soldiers traded cigarettes, chocolate, liquor, and cash for them. A Luger in good condition could fetch $50 in 1944 money, which translates to roughly $850 today. Some men paid even more. Supply officers and rear echelon troops, guys who never fired a shot in anger, would pay top dollar to a combat infantryman willing to sell. Medics, cooks, truck drivers, typists. Anyone stationed behind the lines who wanted to go home with a story was willing to overpay. And that created a problem, because it meant some soldiers were not just picking up souvenirs after battles. They were hunting for them during battles. Company commanders reported incidents of men breaking from cover during firefights to search dead or wounded Germans for pistols. One infantry lieutenant in the Hürtgen forest wrote home that he had lost 2 men who got killed because they were trying to pull a Luger off a German officer's body while bullets were still flying. Another soldier in the 29th Infantry Division described watching a replacement step over 3 wounded Americans to reach a dead German with a holster on his belt. The replacement got his Luger. He also got hit by a sniper round 30 seconds later. The Souvenir was not worth dying for, but the obsession was so deep that some men could not help themselves. Some veterans later admitted to feeling more excited about finding a Luger than they felt about surviving the battle where they found it, which tells you something about the psychological space these men were operating in. Beyond the Luger, the European theatre offered an enormous buffet of collectible Nazi memorabilia, SS daggers with their black handles and runic insignia, Iron Cross medals in their presentation boxes, Hitler Youth knives, swastika armbands and flags, officers' dress swords, signal corps equipment with Wehrmacht markings, binoculars, pocket watches, even personal photographs of German soldiers with their families, taken from wallets and breast pockets. The list went on and on. When American forces overran German positions, particularly later in the war as the Wehrmacht collapsed, the looting became almost industrial. Units rolling through abandoned German towns filled jeeps with anything that had a swastika on it. One soldier with the 3rd Armored Division described it as Christmas morning, except every present had an eagle on it. Engineers with the 82nd Airborne shipped home crates of German equipment labeled as field supplies to avoid inspection. Tankers welded extra storage compartments onto their Shermans specifically to hold souvenirs. By the spring of 1945, some companies were rolling through Bavaria with more German gear strapped to their vehicles than American equipment, and it was not just enlisted men. Generals were among the worst offenders. George Patton himself was photographed carrying an ivory-handled German pistol alongside his own famous revolver. When the top brass was collecting, telling a private to put down that SS dagger was never going to work. And if you think Europe was where the souvenir obsession hit its peak, the Pacific tells you a very different story. The war against Japan produced a souvenir culture that was darker, more intense, and more disturbing than anything happening in France or Germany. Part of this was geography. The Pacific War was fought across remote islands, thousands of miles from headquarters, far from journalists and officers who might have imposed some restraint. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each island was its own isolated world where normal rules faded fast. Part of it was the nature of the fighting itself, which was close quarters, fanatical, and extraordinarily brutal. Japanese soldiers fought to the death with a frequency that shocked American troops. Surrenders were rare. Ambushes were constant. Booby traps on corpses meant that even approaching the dead was dangerous, which only deepened the anger toward an enemy who seemed to fight beyond any recognizable rules. The mutual hatred between the two sides reached levels that went far beyond military adversaries. They despised each other. American propaganda depicted the Japanese as subhuman, as rats and monkeys, as animals to be exterminated rather than soldiers to be defeated. Cartoons, newsreels, and posters hammered this message relentlessly. And Japanese propaganda did the same to Americans, portraying them as demons and barbarians. That dehumanization made everything that followed easier. When you do not see the enemy as fully human, the moral barrier to desecrating his body drops to almost nothing. The most prized legitimate souvenirs from the Pacific were Japanese good luck flags, called Hinamaru Yosagaki. Before a soldier left for war, his family and friends would gather around a white flag with the red sun circle in the center and write messages of encouragement, prayers, and good wishes in ink around the edges. Mothers wrote pleas to the gods to protect their sons. Fathers wrote about honor and duty. Childhood friends wrote inside jokes. Neighbors signed their names. Teachers from elementary schools added their blessings. Every Japanese soldier carried one of these flags, usually folded against his body beneath his uniform. They were deeply personal, irreplaceable items that connected a fighting man to everyone he loved back home in Osaka or Kyoto or some farming village in Hokkaido. After a battle, American Marines and Army troops pulled these flags off dead Japanese soldiers by the thousands. They became the most common souvenir of the Pacific War. Some men collected dozens. They could not read a single word written on them. They had no idea they were holding the last physical record of a community's love for a young man who would never return. Samurai swords were the next tier up. Japanese officers carried traditional swords as part of their standard equipment, and taking one was considered a major accomplishment. A good quality officer's sword could be worth hundreds of dollars in trade. And some of these swords were genuine antiques, family heirlooms passed down through generations, forged by master swordsmiths whose names meant something in Japanese culture, the way Stradivarius means something in Western music. American soldiers who captured them rarely understood any of this. To the man pulling a sword off a dead officer in an Okinawan cave, it was a cool-looking trophy, something exotic and deadly to hang on the wall back in Indiana. To the family back in Japan, it was a connection to ancestors going back centuries, gone forever. Some of these swords had survived earthquakes, fires, and previous wars. They did not survive a 19-year-old Marine from Topeka who thought it would make a good conversation piece. But the souvenir culture in the Pacific went further than flags and swords. And this is where the story gets genuinely disturbing. Gold teeth. American soldiers in the Pacific began extracting gold teeth from dead Japanese soldiers almost from the beginning of the war. Sometimes they waited until the enemy was dead. Sometimes they did not. Marines on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, and Iwo Jima all reported witnessing or participating in gold tooth extraction. The teeth were pried out with K-bar knives or bayonet points. Some men collected them in tobacco tins. Others strung them on necklaces or paracord and wore them around their necks. The gold was valuable, sure, but most soldiers who collected teeth were not doing it for the metal value. They were doing it because it marked them as combat veterans who had gotten close enough to the enemy to touch his face. The practice was so widespread that some units had unofficial toothmen, soldiers known for going through the dead after every engagement with a pair of pliers. New replacements arriving on islands like Peleliu were shocked to see veterans casually picking through corpses the way someone might browse a yard sale. But those replacements, the ones who survived long enough, often ended up doing the same thing within weeks. The island fighting did something to men. The constant proximity to death, the smell, the heat, the relentless Japanese resistance, it wore away the boundaries that separated civilized behavior from something more primal. And then there were the skulls. The Life magazine photograph was not an anomaly. Soldiers across the Pacific Theater collected skulls, femur bones, and other human remains from Japanese dead. They boiled skulls in large pots to remove flesh, bleached them with lye or other chemicals, and shipped them home through the military mail system wrapped in newspaper. Some carved their unit numbers into the bone. Others mounted them on sticks outside their tents. A few were turned into ashtrays or candle holders. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, who spent more time with combat troops than almost any journalist alive, wrote about seeing a soldier use a Japanese skull as a decoration on his tent. He wrote about it, matter-of-factly, as if describing a man with a fishing trophy. That was how normalized it had become. Navy sailors on ships near the combat zones developed their own skull trade, paying Marines to bring them bones from the islands. The skulls were polished, inscribed, and displayed in crew quarters. Commanding officers who tried to stop the practice found that discipline collapsed if they pushed too hard. Men fighting and dying on those islands felt entitled to whatever they wanted from the enemy. Telling them otherwise felt, to the soldiers at least, like disrespecting what they had been through. So why did millions of otherwise ordinary men, farmers and factory workers and high school teachers in uniform, become so consumed by collecting trophies from men they had killed? The answer is not simple, because the behavior was not simple. Multiple forces pushed soldiers towards souvenir collecting simultaneously, and untangling them reveals something raw about what war does to the human mind. The most obvious driver was proof. Proof that you had been there. Proof that you had survived. A soldier sitting in a foxhole on a Pacific island, watching his friends die, surrounded by filth and terror, had almost no control over whether he would live or die. A mortar round did not care how brave you were. A sniper's bullet did not negotiate. But a soldier could control what he picked up afterward. That German helmet on the shelf, that Japanese flag in the duffel bag, represented something concrete in a world where everything felt random and meaningless. I was there. I made it. Here is the evidence. Veterans later described feeling almost compelled to take something from every major engagement, as though leaving empty-handed meant the experience had not really counted. The souvenir anchored the memory. Without it, the battle was just a nightmare that faded over time. With it, the battle was real, documented, owned. Closely connected to proof was status. Frontline combat troops developed fierce pride in their identity as men who had actually fought, and they looked down on rear echelon soldiers who had not. Souvenirs became a currency of credibility. Walk into a bar with a Luger on your hip and nobody questioned your war record. Show up with nothing, and you had better have a good explanation. The hierarchy of souvenirs mirrored the hierarchy of combat experience. A button meant nothing. A helmet meant you had been near the action. A pistol meant you had been in it. And a Japanese skull, as grotesque as it sounds, meant you had crossed a line that most men would not cross, which in the twisted logic of combat psychology gave you a status that could not be faked. There was also something darker at work, something that had to do with power and control. Combat strips a person down to survival instincts. For months or years, a soldier exists in a state of absolute helplessness, subject to orders, subject to enemy fire, subject to weather and disease and random chance. Taking a souvenir from a dead enemy was one of the few moments where a soldier had complete agency. He chose to take it. He chose what to take. He decided what happened to that object from that point forward. In a world where nothing was his to decide, that small act of possession felt enormous. Boredom played a role too, and it sounds almost absurd to mention boredom in the same breath as combat. But war is famously described as long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of absolute terror. During those stretches, soldiers needed something to occupy their minds, and souvenir hunting gave them a project. They traded items, compared collections, wrote letters home describing their finds in careful detail. It was a hobby, a strange, morbid hobby born from the strangest, most morbid circumstances imaginable, but a hobby nonetheless. And there was a social dimension to it that should not be overlooked. Men sitting in a foxhole comparing their collections were bonding, sharing stories about how they got each item, where they found it, what the battle was like. That was how soldiers processed their experiences in a time when nobody talked about trauma or PTSD. The souvenirs gave them permission to talk about what they had seen, because they were talking about the object, not their feelings. A Marine holding up a Japanese flag and telling the story of how he pulled it off a dead soldier on Tarawa was, in his own way, talking about the worst day of his life. He just could not say it directly. The flag said it for him. The military command tried to stop the worst of it. They really did. In the Pacific, senior officers issued directives forbidding the collection of human remains after reports reached Washington about the skull trade. President Roosevelt himself was reportedly given a letter opener carved from a Japanese soldier's arm bone by a congressman who thought it was an amusing gift. The congressman apparently saw nothing wrong with it. Roosevelt was disgusted. He ordered the bone returned to Japan through proper channels, and the incident reportedly contributed to a formal military order banning the collection of body parts. The order was issued with strong language about respecting the dignity of the dead. It was widely and enthusiastically ignored. On islands where men had watched their best friends burned alive by flamethrowers or blown apart by banzai charges, a directive from Washington about respecting enemy remains felt like it came from a different planet. In Europe, General Eisenhower's headquarters issued similar directives about looting, particularly as Allied forces advanced into Germany in 1945. Military police at ports of embarkation were supposed to inspect soldiers' baggage before they boarded ships home, confiscating unauthorized weapons and contraband. In practice, the inspections were inconsistent and easily circumvented. Some ports barely checked at all. Others had MPs who were themselves collectors and would look the other way for a cut of the haul. Soldiers wrapped Lugers in oilcloth and buried them in the bottom of their duffel bags. They mailed Japanese swords home in sections, one piece at a time, to avoid detection. They hid gold teeth in tobacco tins and sewed them into the linings of their jackets. One man shipped an entire German motorcycle home, piece by piece, over 6 months. Another disassembled a German MG-42 machine gun, wrapped each component in socks, and distributed the parts among 6 different buddies headed home on the same transport ship. They reassembled it in a garage in Milwaukee 2 weeks later, where there was a will. And when it came to souvenirs, there was always a will. Soldiers found a way. The military was fighting a battle it could never win because the desire to bring something home was hardwired into the combat experience. You cannot order a man to forget the worst years of his life, and you cannot take away the only tangible proof he has that those years were real. The war ended, the men came home, and millions of them carried souvenirs back to small towns and big cities across America. Most of those trophies ended up in attics and basements, wrapped in old blankets, tucked into boxes that sat undisturbed for decades. The men who collected them almost never talked about them. Veterans would show their kids a German helmet or a Japanese flag, and if the kid asked where it came from, the answer was usually short: "I got it in the war." End of conversation. A former infantryman from Ohio kept a Luger in his sock drawer for 43 years. His wife did not know it was there until he died, and she was cleaning out his things. A retired master sergeant in Florida had a footlocker in his garage with 11 Japanese flags, 2 swords, a bayonet, and a set of dog tags he had taken off a dead German in the Ardennes. His grandchildren found it in 2003 and had no idea what any of it meant. The souvenirs that had once represented pride, status, and proof of survival slowly became objects that veterans did not want to think about too much. Because time has a way of stripping away the adrenaline and the camaraderie and the survival instinct, and what you are left with is a dead man's belongings sitting in a box in your closet. And the older you get, the heavier that box feels. Some veterans disposed of their collections quietly. Others donated items to local museums or VFW halls. And some could not bring themselves to do either. They kept the souvenirs but could not explain why, even to themselves. One former Marine interviewed in the 1990s, nearly 50 years after the war, described finding a Japanese good luck flag among his late father's belongings. The flag was covered in handwritten messages from the dead soldier's family. The Marine's son was finally old enough to understand what those messages meant, that they were prayers from a mother and father who never saw their boy again, and he broke down crying. He said he had never thought of the enemy as a person with parents before that moment. In recent years, a quiet movement has grown around the return of those Japanese good luck flags. Organizations like the Obon Society, founded in Oregon by Rex and Keiko Ziak, have dedicated themselves to tracking down the families of the soldiers those flags belong to and returning them. The process is painstaking. Volunteers translate the handwritten messages on each flag, identify family names, cross-reference them with Japanese military records, and try to locate living descendants. Each flag still carries the names and messages of family members. And in many cases, the families back in Japan had no idea what had happened to their loved ones. The Japanese government classified many Pacific casualties simply as missing, with no remains recovered and no personal effects returned. So when a flag comes back, sometimes 70 or 80 years after it was taken, the reunions are emotional in ways that are hard to describe. Elderly Japanese women in their 90s, sisters and daughters of long-dead soldiers, hold the flags and trace their fingers over messages written by parents who have also been dead for decades. They can read the handwriting of a mother who waited her entire life for a son who never came home. For these families, the return of a flag is not just a historical artifact coming home. It is the last piece of a person who vanished into the war and never came back. And for the American families who send the flags, there is something healing in it too. The grandson who found a flag in Grandpa's attic and learned what it meant, who took the time to track down the family and return it, is completing a circle that started with a young man's death on a jungle island more than 8 decades ago. And maybe that is the most honest way to understand the souvenir obsession. Those objects were never really about trophies or status or proving anything to anyone. They were about the impossible task of making sense of what war does to people on both sides. A German helmet in an American attic is a monument to the fact that 2 men from different countries tried to kill each other, and one of them succeeded. A Japanese flag in a shoebox in Iowa is a record of a family's love, ripped away in a moment of violence and carried across an ocean by a young man who probably did not understand what he was holding. The souvenirs are the physical residue of the single most destructive event in human history, scattered across millions of homes, carried by millions of hands, telling millions of stories that most people never got to hear. Every object had a person behind it. Every person had a family. Every family had a story that ended when that helmet hit the sand, or that flag was pulled from a pocket. The soldiers who collected these things were not monsters. They were young men caught in something enormous, grabbing onto anything solid they could find. And the things they grabbed onto were, more often than not, the last traces of somebody else's son. If this story hit different than you expected, drop a like and subscribe. Leave a comment telling us what you think about the souvenir tradition. Whether you think it was understandable survival behavior or something that crossed a line.